During the ceremony, the police dog walked away unprompted. When it stopped in front of the cake, everyone froze at what it found. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the immaculate grounds of Rosewood Manor, illuminating the white silk tent that billowed gently in the spring breeze. Inside, wedding guests mingled and laughed, their voices forming a symphony of joy that matched the magnificent occasion. Every detail of Sarah Mitchell and Daniel Harrison's wedding had been meticulously planned over 18 months, from the cascading orchid arrangements to the champagne fountain that sparkled like liquid diamonds under the crystal chandeliers. But no one, not even the detail-oriented bride, could have predicted what would unfold when the cake was finally presented. Retired Police Sergeant James Cooper stood by the bar, feeling somewhat out of place among the high society crowd, his weathered hands wrapped around a glass of whiskey as his eyes scanned the room, an old habit from 30 years on the force. At his feet lay his constant companion, a 7-year-old German Shepherd named Maximus, or Max for short. The dog's dark, intelligent eyes continuously surveyed the room, his formal appearance enhanced by a specially made blue collar boasting a small white bow tie attachment. "Quite the shindig, isn't it, boy?" James murmured, looking down at his partner. Max's ears perked up at his handler's voice, but his attention remained divided, a slight tension in his powerful body that James had learned to recognize over their 5 years together on the K9 unit before they both retired last year. Sarah, resplendent in her designer gown, made her way through the crowd toward her former neighbor. Her smile brightened when she spotted the duo. "James, I'm so glad you could make it," she exclaimed, bending carefully to scratch Max behind the ears. "And you too, handsome. The most distinguished guest at my wedding, without a doubt." Max allowed the affection, his tail offering a measured wag of appreciation, but James noticed his partner's usual enthusiastic greeting was subdued. Something had the dog's attention. "Wouldn't have missed it for the world, Sarah. You look beautiful. Your father would have been so proud." James smiled, the mention of Sarah's late father, his former police partner, bringing a momentary shadow across both their faces. "I know," she whispered, blinking back tears that threatened to spoil her perfect makeup. "That's why having you walk me down the aisle meant everything to me. Dad always said you were the brother he never had." James nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Robert Mitchell had taken a bullet meant for him during a drug bust gone wrong 15 years ago. Watching over his daughter had become James's silent promise to his fallen friend. And now, having given her away at the altar, he felt a chapter closing, a bittersweet fulfillment of that promise. "Seems like Max is working security today," Sarah laughed, noticing the dog's vigilant posture. "Old habits," James chuckled. "You can retire the dog from the force, but you can't take the cop out of the dog. He's probably just keeping an eye out for anyone who might steal the spotlight from the beautiful bride." The wedding planner, a slim woman with a perpetually stressed expression and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, approached them with determined steps. "Mrs. Harrison," she said, addressing Sarah by her new name with practiced precision, "the kitchen staff is ready to bring out the cake. Your husband is waiting to escort you for the cutting ceremony." Sarah squeezed James's arm. "Duty calls. Save me a dance later." "As long as you don't mind your toes getting stepped on," James replied with a self-deprecating smile. These old feet weren't made for dancing. As Sarah was whisked away, James felt Max stiffen beside him. Looking down, he saw the change immediately. The slight forward tilt of his ears, the fixed gaze, the almost imperceptible rise of fur along his spine. These were signals James knew all too well from their days on the force. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, instinctively scanning the room for anything unusual. The crowd parted as waitstaff wheeled in the magnificent 5-tier wedding cake, a masterpiece of white fondant, edible pearls and delicate sugar flowers that had cost more than James's monthly pension. Max's body tensed further, a low growl rumbling in his chest, almost inaudible beneath the excited applause of the wedding guests. The reaction surprised James. Max was impeccably trained and rarely showed aggression without cause. "Easy, Max," he commanded softly, placing a calming hand on the dog's head. But Max remained fixated on the cake as it was positioned at the center of the dance floor, where Daniel now stood with Sarah at his side, both beaming with happiness. The photographer directed the couple into position, asking them to pose with the ceremonial knife poised above the bottom tier. James watched as Max's behavior grew increasingly concerning. The dog was now trembling slightly, his attention unwavering from the cake. Something was wrong. James had learned long ago to trust Max's instincts. The dog had found buried evidence, hidden drugs, and even survivors trapped in rubble after a building collapse. His nose was more reliable than any technology the department had ever purchased. "Excuse me," James said, gently pushing through the crowd that had gathered to watch the cake cutting. Max moved with purpose at his side, his leash taut as he led rather than followed. The wedding planner intercepted them with a horrified expression. "Sir, you can't bring the dog near the cake. The health regulations—" "Ma'am, this is a retired police K-9, James stated firmly, his authoritative tone silencing her objections. "Something's not right with that cake." As they approached, Max's behavior escalated from concern to urgent. His training prevented him from barking wildly, but the intensity of his focus was unmistakable to James. The dog wanted to alert, desperately. Sarah noticed them approaching, and her smile faltered slightly. "James, is everything okay?" The room quieted as guests became aware of the unexpected interruption. Daniel's arm tightened protectively around his new wife's waist, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "I'm sorry to intrude," James began, suddenly aware of all eyes on him. "But Max is alerting to something in or around the cake. I think there might be—" "Oh, for heaven's sake," came an exasperated voice from behind him. Victoria Harrison, Daniel's mother and the epitome of old money and social standing, stepped forward with a dismissive wave. "It's just a cake. Your dog probably smells the sugar or the buttercream. This is hardly the time for dramatics." James felt a flash of embarrassment. Was he overreacting? Had retirement made him too dependent on Max's companionship, too willing to see danger where there was none? But a quick glance at Max confirmed his initial concern. This was a legitimate alert, not a hungry dog eyeing a treat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Harrison, Max was one of the top detection dogs in the state. He doesn't alert to food unless there's something in it that shouldn't be there." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah's eyes widened with alarm, while Daniel's narrowed with suspicion. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. Before James could respond, Max made the decision for him. With a swift movement that belied his age, the German Shepherd approached the cake and performed his trained indication, sitting rigidly beside the object of concern, his nose pointing directly at the bottom tier. "Max, back," James commanded, but the damage was done. Gasps and whispers erupted among the guests. The wedding planner looked ready to faint. "I think," James said carefully, "that someone should check the cake before you cut into it." Daniel's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're ruining our moment because of some paranoid retired cop routine. Sarah, tell him to take the dog and leave." Sarah hesitated, torn between her new husband and the man who had been a surrogate father to her. "Daniel, James wouldn't do this without reason. Maybe you should remember whose side you're on now," Daniel hissed, quiet enough that only Sarah and James could hear. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. James recognized the look that flashed across Sarah's face, hurt, quickly masked by compliance. It was a look he'd seen too often in domestic disturbance calls during his years on patrol. "I apologize for the disruption," James said stiffly, though he made no move to retreat. "But I'm not leaving until someone checks that cake." A tall man in a chef's coat pushed through the crowd, his face a storm of professional indignation. "I am Marcel Dupont, the executive pastry chef responsible for this creation. I assure you, monsieur, nothing is wrong with my cake. It was under supervision from preparation to delivery." Marcel's protest might have carried more weight if Max hadn't chosen that moment to whine urgently, a sound James knew well. It meant the dog had found something significant. "Then you won't mind if we take a closer look," James insisted, his voice leaving no room for argument. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcel, with exaggerated movements meant to convey his certainty, produced a thin metal spatula from his pocket and approached the cake. With surgical precision, he inserted the tool into the bottom tier, away from the visible front where the ceremonial cut would be made. "See, nothing but cake and—" The chef's words died abruptly as the spatula connected with something solid. His expression shifted from confident dismissal to confused concern. "What is this?" James stepped forward. "Carefully remove whatever it is." With trembling hands, Marcel worked the spatula deeper, then slowly extracted something small and dark from within the cake's base. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers as the object caught the light. A small black device, no larger than a matchbox, with a tiny blinking red light. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that a bomb?" Panic rippled through the crowd. Several guests backed away rapidly, while others froze in shock. James's police training kicked in immediately. "Everyone stay calm," he commanded, his voice cutting through the rising hysteria. "It's not a bomb." He could tell from the device's size and configuration that it wasn't explosive, but it was definitely electronic, and definitely shouldn't have been inside a wedding cake. "Then what is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as Daniel pulled her protectively against him. James studied the device without touching it. "It looks like some kind of listening device. A bug." The revelation hung in the air for a moment, before the implications settled over the gathering like a dark cloud. Someone had intended to secretly record the wedding reception, capturing private conversations and intimate moments without consent. All eyes turned to Max, who had relaxed his alert posture now that the device had been discovered. The dog sat calmly, mission accomplished, seemingly unaware of the chaos he had just unleashed on Sarah and Daniel's perfect day. "Who would do something like this?" Sarah whispered, looking around at their guests with new suspicion in her eyes. James wished he had an answer for her. Instead, he placed a reassuring hand on Max's head, silently thanking his partner for once again proving that some instincts never retire. Whatever was happening here, whatever secrets someone wanted badly enough to resort to surveillance, they had just scratched the surface. And judging by the panicked expression now visible on certain faces in the crowd, Max's discovery was only the beginning of what promised to be a wedding day no one would ever forget. The discovery of the listening device sent ripples of shock through the wedding reception. Guests huddled in whispered clusters, casting suspicious glances at one another while the catering staff was hastily assembled for questioning. The magnificent cake, now partially dismantled as Marcel and his assistants checked each tier for additional devices, stood as a ruined centerpiece to what had begun as a fairy tale celebration. Daniel Harrison had immediately called his private security team, who arrived within minutes to secure the perimeter of Rosewood Manor. No one was being allowed to leave, a decision that prompted indignant protests from several guests but was firmly enforced by the stone-faced security personnel. James Cooper had automatically fallen back into his role as a police officer, working alongside Daniel's security chief to coordinate the response. The local police had been notified but were still en route. Meanwhile, Max remained vigilant, performing a thorough sweep of the reception area to ensure there were no additional threats hidden among the elegant decorations. Sarah had retreated to a small antechamber adjacent to the main reception hall, her wedding gown billowing around her as she sat rigid with anger and confusion. James found her there after ensuring the initial security measures were in place. "How are you holding up?" he asked, closing the door behind him. Max padded silently to Sarah's side, resting his head on her lap in a gesture of canine comfort. "Who would do this, James?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Who would want to spy on my wedding day?" James lowered himself into a chair across from her, his knees protesting after the sudden activity. "That's what we need to figure out." The device was professional grade, not something you'd pick up at a local electronics store. Someone came prepared and had access to specialized equipment. Sarah's fingers absently stroked Max's fur as she considered this. "You don't think it's just some reporter trying to get gossip about the guests, do you? Daniel's family has some high-profile connections." "It's possible," James conceded, though his instincts suggested otherwise. But the placement inside the cake required inside access. Someone who could get to it during preparation or delivery. The door opened, and Daniel entered, his face a mask of controlled fury. He nodded tersely to James before kneeling beside his bride. "The security team is interviewing everyone, starting with the kitchen staff. We'll find whoever did this, Sarah." "Do you have any idea who might target you?" James asked, studying Daniel's reaction carefully. Something about the man's demeanor had always struck the former police sergeant as slightly off, though he'd never been able to pinpoint why. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I have competitors who would love to know about my business dealings, but bugging a wedding cake seems extreme even for corporate espionage." "And you, Sarah?" James turned to her. "Anyone from your work or personal life who might have a grudge?" Sarah shook her head, then paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I don't think so, but..." She glanced at Daniel, then back to James. "There was an incident last month at the foundation. Some financial discrepancies I reported to the board. It caused quite a stir." Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "That was resolved, Sarah, and none of those people are here today." "Actually," Sarah corrected gently, "Martin Reeves is here. He's the board treasurer, and he was quite upset when I flagged those transactions." James filed this information away mentally. "Anyone else who might have reason to eavesdrop on conversations here today?" The couple exchanged a look that James couldn't quite interpret. There was something they weren't saying. "Maybe it's just a prank," Daniel suggested, standing up and straightening his tuxedo jacket. "A tasteless joke by someone who thought it would be funny." "A rather expensive and elaborate prank," James observed. "That listening device would have transmitted to someone nearby. They wanted specific information." Max suddenly lifted his head from Sarah's lap, his ears perking forward. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" James asked, immediately alert. Before anyone could react further, the door opened again, revealing Victoria Harrison, Daniel's mother. Her expression was cold and composed, though the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her designer handbag betrayed her agitation. "The police have arrived," she announced, her gaze sliding over James with poorly concealed disdain before settling on her son. "Daniel, they're asking for you specifically. Apparently, they want to know about your connection to someone named Elena Vasquez." Daniel stiffened visibly. "What about her?" "They didn't share details with me," Victoria replied, a brittle edge to her voice. "Only that it might be relevant to this situation." Sarah looked up at her husband, confusion evident on her face. "Elena Vasquez? Who is that, Daniel?" "A former employee," he answered quickly. She left the company about 6 months ago. I don't see how she could be connected to this. James noticed the slight flush creeping up Daniel's neck, a telltale sign of discomfort that he'd observed in countless suspects over the years. Max had picked up on it too. The dog's attention was now fixed intently on Daniel. I should go speak with the police, Daniel said, avoiding his wife's questioning gaze. Mother, would you stay with Sarah? Victoria nodded curtly, taking the seat James had vacated as Daniel strode from the room. The atmosphere grew immediately more tense in his absence. Mrs. Harrison, James began, do you know anything about this Elena Vasquez? Victoria's perfectly painted lips thinned. As my son said, a former employee. Nothing more. She turned to Sarah with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. My dear, perhaps you should freshen up. Whatever this unpleasantness is, I'm sure it will be resolved quickly, and we can salvage what remains of your special day. Sarah didn't move. James, would you mind giving me a moment alone with my mother-in-law? Recognizing the steely determination in Sarah's voice, so reminiscent of her father, James nodded. Of course. Max and I will check on the situation outside. Call if you need anything. As they left the room, James could feel Victoria's cold stare boring into his back. Max trotted alongside him, still on high alert as they returned to the main reception area, which now resembled a crime scene more than a wedding celebration. The local police had established a command post near the ruined cake. Chief Carson, an old colleague of James's, greeted him with a grim nod. Cooper, should have known you'd be in the middle of this. Your dog found the device? He did, James confirmed. Any leads on where it came from? Carson gestured toward a tall man in plain clothes who was examining the listening device, now carefully bagged as evidence. Detective Morris thinks it's Russian-made, high-end surveillance equipment. Russian? James frowned. That seems oddly specific for a wedding in Connecticut. That's what I thought, Carson agreed. Until we ran a background check on Daniel Harrison. His company has been negotiating a major deal with a Russian technology firm for the past 3 months. Very hush-hush, but apparently worth billions if it goes through. James absorbed this information, connecting it to Daniel's visible discomfort at the mention of Elena Vasquez. What about this former employee the officers were asking about? Carson raised an eyebrow. You heard about that? Elena Vasquez was Harrison's executive assistant until 6 months ago when she suddenly resigned. Rumor has it she'd left with copies of sensitive documents related to the Russian deal. Let me guess, James said, the picture becoming clearer. She had access to his schedule, including wedding details. Bingo. Carson nodded. And here's where it gets interesting. We just got confirmation that her name was on the original guest list for this wedding, but it was removed 3 weeks ago. Max suddenly tensed beside James, his attention drawn to the entrance of the reception hall, where a commotion was unfolding. A woman in a catering uniform was being escorted in by 2 security guards, her protests loud enough to be heard across the room. I already told you, I'm just filling in for my cousin. I've never worked here before today. James and Carson exchanged a glance before moving toward the disturbance. As they approached, James could see the woman more clearly, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her features striking even under obvious distress. What's going on here? Carson demanded, flashing his badge. One of the security guards answered. Found her trying to leave through the service entrance, Chief. Says she's a last-minute replacement for the regular staff, but none of the other caterers recognize her. James studied the woman carefully. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Max seemed equally interested, his nose working as he caught her scent. What's your name, ma'am? Carson asked. She lifted her chin defiantly. Maria Delgado. I was called in this morning when someone didn't show up. I have ID. She reached for her pocket but was stopped by one of the guards. "Let her show her identification," James instructed, noting how her accent seemed to slip in and out as she spoke. The woman produced a driver's license, which Carson examined carefully before handing it to James. The ID looked authentic, but something about the photograph didn't quite match the woman standing before them. "Ms. Delgado," James said slowly, "when exactly were you hired for this event?" "This morning, like I said," she replied, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "Look, I was just here to serve champagne, not answer a police interrogation." Max chose that moment to move closer to the woman, his nose twitching as he detected something of interest. She flinched away from the dog, her composure cracking momentarily. "Keep that animal away from me," she demanded, a hint of panic in her voice. Carson nodded to one of his officers. "Take Ms. Delgado to the library for further questioning and have someone verify her identity with the catering company." As she was led away, Max attempted to follow, clearly interested in her scent. James held him back, his mind racing as he tried to place where he'd seen the woman before. "James!" Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to see her hurrying toward him, still in her wedding gown, but with a determined expression that had replaced her earlier shock. "James, I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel and that woman, Elena Vasquez." Before she could continue, a loud crash came from the direction of the kitchen, followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Max barked sharply, and in the ensuing confusion, James caught a glimpse of the catering staff woman, Maria Delgado, breaking free from her escort and sprinting toward the rear exit. And in that moment of pursuit, as her carefully constructed facade slipped, James finally recognized her face from a security briefing he'd attended just before his retirement. She wasn't Maria Delgado, and she certainly wasn't just a caterer. "Max, track!" James commanded, instantly reverting to the familiar police protocols. The German Shepherd responded immediately, nose to the ground as he followed the scent trail left by the fleeing woman. James kept pace behind him while Carson barked orders into his radio, coordinating officers to secure the perimeter. "Wait," Sarah called after them. "James, you need to know." "Tell him later," Carson interrupted, gently but firmly redirecting Sarah toward the reception hall. "Right now, we need to contain the situation." James and Max burst through the kitchen's rear exit into the expansive grounds of Rosewood Manor. The manicured gardens, which had earlier provided a picturesque backdrop for wedding photographs, now served as a tactical field. Max moved with purpose, tracking their quarry through sculpted hedgerows and past elegant stone fountains. The woman had discarded her catering jacket, leaving it draped across a rose bush as she fled. James snatched it up, allowing Max to refresh the scent before continuing the pursuit. They rounded a corner near the greenhouse and spotted her sprinting toward the wooded area that bordered the property. "Police, stop where you are!" James shouted, though he no longer carried the authority of his badge. The woman glanced back briefly, her carefully constructed disguise now abandoned. Dark hair streaming free from its tight bun, her movements no longer those of a server, but of someone with tactical training. She vaulted over a decorative fence with practiced ease and disappeared into the tree line. Max accelerated, his powerful legs covering ground quickly as James struggled to keep pace. Age and retirement had slowed him, but adrenaline propelled him forward. They entered the woods, where dappled sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a disorienting pattern of light and shadow. "Find her, Max," James urged, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The dog moved methodically through the underbrush, following an invisible trail that only his heightened senses could detect. Suddenly he stopped, his body rigid with alert posture. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he fixed his gaze on a dense thicket ahead. James approached cautiously, wishing for the sidearm he'd carried for 30 years. "Come out slowly," he called. "There's nowhere to go." For a moment, Only silence answered him. Then branches parted, and the woman emerged, hands raised but posture defiant. Now that she'd abandoned all pretense, James was certain of her identity. Elena Vasquez, he stated, rather than asked. Or should I say, Captain Yelena Vasiliev of Russian intelligence. A flicker of surprise crossed her features before being replaced by a cold smile. Impressive for a retired officer. How did you make me? Counterintelligence briefing about 18 months ago. Your photo was circulated to law enforcement agencies after you were spotted at a technology conference in Boston. James kept his distance, maintaining visual contact while allowing Max to guard against sudden movements. You're a long way from your usual targets. And you're interfering in matters beyond your jurisdiction, Mr. Cooper. Her English was now tinged with a subtle Russian accent she'd previously concealed. This doesn't concern you. A surveillance device at my goddaughter's wedding absolutely concerns me, James countered. What's your interest in Daniel Harrison? Elena, or Yelena, maintained her composure, though her eyes darted occasionally to Max, who remained vigilant at James's side. Perhaps you should ask him about Project Prometheus. He's not the innocent businessman he pretends to be. The sound of approaching voices and crackling radios indicated that Carson's officers were closing in on their position. Yelena's expression hardened. You should know that the listening device was not my work, she said quickly. I came to observe, not to spy. Someone else has taken an interest in your godchild's new husband, someone who makes my government look benevolent by comparison. Before James could respond, uniformed officers burst through the trees, weapons drawn. Yelena was quickly handcuffed and led away, but her parting glance at James carried a warning he couldn't ignore. Max whined softly, sensing his handler's unease. Good boy, James murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. Let's get back to Sarah. By the time they returned to the manor, the wedding reception had been officially terminated. Guests were being interviewed and released in small groups. The elegant celebration reduced to a procedural law enforcement operation. The magnificent tent with its crystal chandeliers and flower arrangements now stood mostly empty, a hollow shell of the joyous occasion it was meant to house. James found Sarah in the library, a tumbler of amber liquid clutched in her trembling hand. Her wedding gown, bustled for dancing, pooled around her on the leather sofa where she sat, staring vacantly at the antique globe in the corner. I'm so sorry about all this, James said, taking a seat across from her. Max approached Sarah and rested his head on her knee, offering silent comfort. She took a long swallow from her glass before meeting his eyes. You know what the strangest part is? I'm not even surprised. Deep down, I think I've known for months that something wasn't right with Daniel. What do you mean? Sarah sighed heavily. Late-night phone calls in languages I didn't recognize. Mysterious business trips that he couldn't discuss. Files hidden in encrypted folders on his laptop. She absently stroked Max's head. I told myself it was just the pressure of the merger his company was negotiating. I wanted to believe that. Sarah, James leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. The woman we just apprehended is a known Russian intelligence operative. She mentioned something called Project Prometheus in connection with Daniel. Does that mean anything to you? A flicker of recognition crossed Sarah's face. I saw that name once, on a document Daniel left in the printer. When I asked about it, he became angry. The only time I've ever seen him truly lose his temper. He said it was classified and that I should forget I ever saw it. The library door opened, and Chief Carson entered, his expression grave. James, we need to talk, privately. Sarah straightened, her eyes flashing with her father's determination. Whatever you have to say, Chief Carson, you can say it in front of me. This is my wedding day, and apparently my husband is at the center of whatever's happening. I deserve to know. Carson hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The woman you apprehended has diplomatic immunity. The feds have already arrived to take custody, but she'll likely be on a plane back to Moscow before midnight. That's ridiculous, James protested. She was implicated in espionage, caught fleeing the scene. It's complicated, Carson interrupted. And that's not all. We found something when we searched her belongings. He produced an evidence bag containing a small flash drive. This was hidden in the heel of her shoe. Preliminary analysis shows it contains fragments of technical specifications for something called Prometheus Protocol, some kind of advanced cybersecurity system. That has to be what she was after, James concluded. Industrial espionage. That's what we thought too, Carson agreed, until we found this. He held up a second evidence bag containing what appeared to be a hotel key card. It's for the bridal suite at the Grand Regent Hotel, where the happy couple is scheduled to spend tonight before leaving for their honeymoon. The back has been modified with a reader that would copy the data from any key card it comes in contact with. Sarah paled visibly. She was going to break into our hotel room? Why? We think she was after this. Carson produced a third evidence bag, this one containing a sleek portable hard drive. We found this in your husband's briefcase in the bridal suite preparation room. It's been physically modified with what our tech guy thinks is an additional encryption chip, military grade. Whatever's on it, someone went to extraordinary lengths to keep it secure. Where is Daniel now? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carson and James exchanged uncomfortable glances. That's the other thing we need to discuss, Carson said gently. Your husband appears to have left the premises during the confusion following the chase. His car is gone, and he's not answering his phone. Sarah's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Max jumped back, startled by the noise. He left me? The words came out hollow, disbelieving. On our wedding day? James moved to sit beside her, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. There might be an explanation. Maybe he felt threatened, thought he needed to secure something. Or maybe, Sarah interrupted, a new hardness entering her voice. My husband isn't who I thought he was at all. The library door burst open as Daniel's mother, Victoria, stormed in, her face twisted with fury. What have you done? She demanded, glaring at Sarah. Where is my son? Mrs. Harrison, Carson began, we're trying to locate your son for questioning. Questioning? Victoria spat the word. My son has dedicated his life to serving this country's interests, and this is how he's repaid? With suspicion and humiliation on what should have been the happiest day of his life? Sarah stood slowly, the broken glass crunching beneath her satin wedding shoes. What do you mean, serving this country's interests? Victoria seemed to realize she'd said too much. She pressed her lips together tightly, her gaze flickering to the evidence bags Carson still held. Victoria, James said carefully, if you know something about Project Prometheus or why a Russian intelligence officer would be interested in your son, now would be a good time to share that information. Max had moved to the library entrance, his posture alert as he stared down the hallway. A low, warning growl emanated from his throat. Someone's coming, James said quietly, moving protectively toward Sarah. Heavy footsteps approached, and a moment later, 3 men in identical dark suits appeared in the doorway. They wore earpieces and the unmistakable bulge of shoulder holsters beneath their jackets. Chief Carson, the lead man said, flashing credentials briefly. I'm Special Agent Donovan, Homeland Security. We'll be taking over this investigation effective immediately. Carson bristled. On whose authority? The highest, Donovan replied without elaboration. His gaze traveled to the evidence bags. We'll need everything you've collected, particularly the drive. And Daniel? Sarah demanded. Are you looking for my husband too, or do you already know where he is? Agent Donovan regarded her impassively. Mrs. Harrison, I understand this is a difficult situation, but I need you to come with us as well. We have some questions about your husband's activities and your potential knowledge of classified operations. Victoria gave a small, satisfied nod, as if this development confirmed something she already knew. Max growled again, more insistently this time, positioning himself between Sarah and the federal agents. The dog's protective instinct, honed through years of police work, recognized a threat, even one wearing a badge. James felt the situation balancing on a knife's edge. Something much bigger than wedding day surveillance was unfolding, something that had attracted the attention of both foreign intelligence and Homeland Security. And somehow his goddaughter had become entangled in a web of secrets and lies on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Whatever Project Prometheus was, James was now certain of one thing. Max hadn't just discovered a listening device in a wedding cake. He'd uncovered the edge of a conspiracy that threatened to tear Sarah's world apart, and possibly much more. James positioned himself beside Sarah, Max standing guard at their feet. The tension in the library was palpable as Agent Donovan and his team awaited their compliance. "I'd like to see a warrant," James stated, his voice carrying the authority of his 30 years in law enforcement. "Mrs. Harrison isn't going anywhere without proper documentation." Donovan's expression remained impassive. "This is a matter of national security, Mr. Cooper. Standard protocols have been superseded." "Even national security is bound by the Constitution," James countered. "No warrant, no cooperation." Chief Carson stepped forward, placing himself strategically between the federal agents and Sarah. "As the ranking law enforcement officer present, I have to insist on proper procedure, Agent Donovan. Until I see appropriate paperwork, Mrs. Harrison remains under my jurisdiction." A flicker of annoyance crossed Donovan's face. He nodded to one of his colleagues, who produced a folder and handed it to Carson. The police chief examined the contents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is signed by a FISA court judge," he said finally, looking up at James. "It's legitimate." Victoria Harrison made a small sound of satisfaction. "As I told you, my son's work is important. Perhaps now you'll stop treating him like a criminal." Sarah turned to her mother-in-law, her shock giving way to anger. "You knew about this? Whatever Daniel is involved in, you knew?" Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "I know that my son serves his country in ways that cannot be publicly acknowledged. And I know that he married you because he genuinely loves you despite the complications it presented to his work." "What complications?" Sarah demanded. "What exactly is my husband involved in?" "Mrs. Harrison," Donovan interrupted, "this isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion. We need to continue this at a secure facility." Max growled low in his throat, sensing the rising tension. The dog's eyes remained fixed on the federal agents, his powerful body coiled and ready to defend if necessary. James placed a calming hand on Max's head while his mind raced through options. The situation was escalating beyond his control, but his instincts, honed through decades of police work, screamed that something was wrong with this scenario. "I'll accompany Sarah," he announced firmly, "and Max comes with us." Donovan shook his head. "That won't be possible, Mr. Cooper. This is a classified debriefing." "Then it's not happening," Sarah declared, her voice steadier than James would have expected given the circumstances. "James and Max stay with me, or I don't say a word to any of you. And trust me, Agent Donovan, if my husband is involved in something that requires this level of federal intervention, you're going to want my cooperation." A standoff ensued as Donovan assessed the situation. Finally, he touched his earpiece, turning slightly away as he murmured something too quiet for the others to hear. After a moment, he turned back. Fine. Mr. Cooper and the dog can accompany us, but only to the preliminary debriefing site. After that, it's non-negotiable. Carson looked conflicted. James, are you sure about this? I can try to stall them. Call the district attorney. It's okay, Mark, James assured his old colleague. I'll make sure Sarah's rights are protected. He turned to Donovan. Lead the way, Agent. As they prepared to leave, Victoria moved to follow, but Donovan blocked her path. Mrs. Harrison Sr., you'll need to remain here. One of my colleagues will take your statement. Victoria's face flushed with indignation. This is outrageous. I'm Daniel's mother, and not cleared for what we're about to discuss. Donovan cut in firmly. Please, ma'am, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. James, Sarah, and Max were escorted through the manor's back entrance, avoiding the remaining wedding guests still being processed by local police. 2 identical black SUVs waited in the service driveway, engines idling. As they approached, Max suddenly stiffened, his nose working rapidly as he caught a scent. What is it, boy? James murmured, instantly alert. The dog pulled toward the second vehicle, his body language signaling interest rather than threat. James allowed him to approach, watching as Max sniffed intently at the rear passenger door. Your dog seems quite interested in our transportation, Donovan observed, a new edge to his voice. He's picking up a familiar scent, James replied, studying the agent's reaction carefully. Someone he's encountered before. Donovan checked his watch with deliberate casualness. We need to move. Mrs. Harrison, you'll ride with me in the lead vehicle. Mr. Cooper and the dog can follow in the second. No, Sarah said immediately. We stay together. That's not non-negotiable, Sarah interrupted, channeling her new husband's boardroom authority. Either we ride together or you can explain to your superiors why you're returning to headquarters without the cooperation you were sent to secure. A tense silence followed before Donovan yielded with visible reluctance. Fine. First vehicle. All of you. As they were ushered into the SUV, James noticed the subtlest exchange of glances between Donovan and the driver of the second vehicle, a silent communication that heightened his already substantial concerns. Once inside, with Max alert but calm at their feet, the convoy pulled away from Rosewood Manor. Sarah stared out the window as her wedding venue receded into the distance, the white tent growing smaller until it disappeared behind the tree line, a visual metaphor for the life she thought she had slipping away. Where exactly are we going? James asked, breaking the silence. A secure facility in Hartford, Donovan replied without turning around, approximately 40 minutes away. The federal agent's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and frowned before typing a rapid response. James noted how the man angled the device away, preventing them from seeing the exchange. Is my husband going to be there? Sarah asked suddenly. A weighted pause followed. Mr. Harrison is, assisting our colleagues at another location. So he's in custody, James translated. I didn't say that, Donovan replied evenly. Mr. Harrison voluntarily agreed to provide information relevant to our investigation. And what investigation is that exactly? Sarah pressed. What is Project Prometheus? Donovan's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details until we reach the secure facility, Mrs. Harrison. The SUV turned onto the interstate, accelerating smoothly as it merged with traffic. Through the rear window, James could see the second vehicle following at a precise distance. Max remained unusually attentive, his eyes fixed on the back of the driver's seat, nose occasionally twitching as if continuing to process a scent of interest. James's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to find a text message from Chief Carson. Fed credentials check out, but something's off. Langley has no record of operation matching Donovan's description. Stand by. He deleted the message immediately, but not before Sarah had glimpsed it over his shoulder. Her eyes widened slightly, but to her credit, her expression revealed nothing else. "Agent Donovan," James said casually, "how long have you been with Homeland Security?" 11 years, came the prompt reply, though this particular task force is a joint operation with other agencies. "Which agencies?" James pressed. Donovan's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. "That information is classified, Mr. Cooper. As a former police officer, I'm sure you understand the need for operational security." Max suddenly raised his head, ears perking forward as he detected something beyond human perception. A low whine escaped him, not a warning growl, but the sound he made when he wanted James's attention. "Everything okay back there?" Donovan asked, his gaze flicking to Max in the mirror. "Just restless," James replied, placing a calming hand on the dog's back while trying to interpret his partner's signal. Something had changed, something only Max had noticed. Sarah leaned closer to James, ostensibly to comfort Max, and whispered, "The driver keeps checking something in his lap. I think it's a separate phone." James nodded almost imperceptibly, his unease growing. Max's behavior, Carson's message, the driver's secretive communications, everything pointed to a scenario far more complex than it initially appeared. The SUV took an unexpected exit, veering off the main highway onto a less traveled road. "I thought we were going to Hartford," Sarah observed. "Slight change of route," Donovan explained smoothly. "Standard security protocol." The second SUV followed, maintaining its distance. They were now on a 2-lane road cutting through thick woodland, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Traffic had thinned considerably, with no other vehicles visible in either direction. James's phone vibrated again. Another text from Carson. "Urgent. Actual DHS team just arrived at Manor. Whoever you're with is not Homeland Security. Stall. Backup coming." James felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. He'd suspected something was wrong, but confirmation brought the danger into sharp focus. They were in a moving vehicle, outnumbered and outgunned, being taken to an unknown location by people with unknown intentions. He caught Sarah's eye and gave the slightest shake of his head, a silent warning not to reveal that they knew. Whatever was happening, their best chance was to maintain the pretense of cooperation until help arrived or an opportunity presented itself. Max sensed the shift in his handler's demeanor. The German shepherd's muscles tensed beneath James's hand, ready to respond at the first command. Years of police work together had forged a partnership that transcended words. Max understood that they were now in a tactical situation. "How much further?" James asked, keeping his tone conversational while his mind assessed their options. "Not far," Donovan replied, his attention now fixed more on the side mirrors than the road ahead. "We're taking a secure approach to the facility." The road narrowed further, trees pressing close on both sides. Perfect terrain for an ambush, James realized. Isolated, with limited escape routes and no witnesses. Sarah, to her immense credit, maintained her composure despite the danger. She sat straight-backed in her wedding dress, a surreal vision of bridal beauty in the midst of what was rapidly becoming a life-threatening situation. As the SUV rounded a blind curve, a fallen tree suddenly appeared across the road ahead. The driver braked hard, bringing the vehicle to a controlled stop several yards from the obstruction. "Looks like we'll need to move it," the driver said, reaching beneath his seat. Not for tools, James noted with alarm, but almost certainly for a weapon. And in that moment, Max made his decision. With a sharp bark that shattered the pretense of normalcy, the police dog lunged forward between the front seats, teeth bared in a clear threat display that stopped the driver's movement instantly. The game was up, and whatever happened next would determine whether they survived their unexpected detour. Time seemed to compress as the SUV became a battleground. Donovan pivoted in his seat, reaching inside his jacket with practiced efficiency. James reacted instantly, throwing himself forward to grab the agent's arm while shouting the command that would unleash Max's years of police training. "Max, take him!" The German Shepherd launched at the driver with controlled aggression, powerful jaws clamping around the wrist that had been reaching beneath the seat. The man screamed, his hand jerking away from whatever weapon he'd been seeking. Sarah pressed herself against the door as the vehicle erupted into chaos. Donovan managed to free his arm from James's grip and produced a sleek black handgun. But before he could aim, James drove his elbow hard into the man's throat. Donovan gasped, momentarily incapacitated, giving James the seconds he needed to wrench the weapon from his grasp. The driver was still struggling with Max, who maintained his bite hold with the tenacity that had made him legendary in the K-9 unit. Blood stained the dog's muzzle as he held firm, ignoring the man's attempts to dislodge him. "Stop fighting or he'll tear your hand off," James warned, now holding Donovan's gun trained on both men. "Max won't release until I command it, and I won't command it until you're both restrained." The second SUV had stopped behind them. Through the rear window, James could see its occupants beginning to exit the vehicle, undoubtedly armed and responding to the commotion. "Sarah, get down on the floor," James ordered. "Max, release." The dog immediately obeyed, backing away from the driver but maintaining a vigilant stance, ready to attack again if necessary. The driver clutched his mangled wrist to his chest, face pale with pain and shock. "Keys," James demanded. "Toss them to the lady." The driver complied with a shaking hand, and Sarah caught the keys reflexively. "Take the wheel," James instructed her. "Be ready to drive when I tell you." In the side mirror, James could see two men approaching cautiously from the second vehicle, hands hovering near concealed weapons. A third man remained by their SUV, speaking urgently into what appeared to be a radio. "Slide over," James ordered Donovan, who was still struggling to breathe normally after the blow to his throat. "Move," the fake agent complied, shifting into the center of the front seat. James maintained his grip on the weapon as he quickly patted Donovan down, retrieving a second handgun from an ankle holster and a wickedly serrated combat knife from a sheath at his lower back. These were not standard issue for Homeland Security agents, another confirmation that they were dealing with imposters. The men from the second vehicle were now only 20 yards away, advancing with the coordinated movements of tactical training. "Sarah, listen carefully," James said, his voice low and urgent. "When I give the word, you're going to drive straight at that fallen tree. It's not as solid as it looks, probably just placed there to stop us. Hit it at the thinnest part and don't slow down." Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but she nodded, her father's courage evident in her steady gaze. "Gentlemen," James called out the window to the approaching men, "your colleagues are currently indisposed. I suggest you stay where you are unless you want this situation to escalate further." The men hesitated, exchanging glances, clearly unsure how to proceed now that their ambush had been compromised. James saw his opportunity. "Now, Sarah, go." She slammed the SUV into drive and floored the accelerator. The powerful vehicle leaped forward, tires spinning momentarily before finding purchase on the asphalt. The men outside dove for cover, one drawing his weapon but unable to aim properly from his awkward position. "Brace yourselves," James warned as they bore down on the fallen tree. Sarah aimed for a section where the trunk narrowed, her face a mask of determination despite the bridal veil that still clung precariously to her updo. The impact was jarring, but not disastrous. The tree, as James had suspected, had been hastily placed across the road, more for show than substance. The SUV's reinforced bumper crashed through it, sending fragments of rotten wood flying in all directions. The vehicle fishtailed briefly before Sarah regained control, accelerating away from the ambush site. In the back seat, Max maintained a watchful position, his attention fixed on their captive-turned-prisoner. The dog's training was evident in his focused vigilance, awaiting his handler's next command. "Keep driving," James instructed Sarah. Find the main road. We need to put distance between us and them before they regroup." "Who are they?" Sarah demanded, expertly handling the large vehicle despite her wedding attire. "And what do they want with us?" "That's what our friend here is going to tell us," James replied, pressing the barrel of the confiscated gun against Donovan's ribs, starting with his real name and who he works for. The man's lips remained stubbornly sealed, his eyes darting between James and the road ahead, calculating his options. "Fine," James said. "We'll do this the hard way." He pulled Donovan's wallet from his jacket pocket and flipped it open one-handed, never letting the gun waver. The ID inside proclaimed him to be Special Agent Thomas Donovan of the Department of Homeland Security. A good forgery, but James now knew it was fake. More telling was a small photograph tucked into a hidden compartment behind the credit cards. A military ID photo of a much younger Donovan in what appeared to be a foreign uniform, Cyrillic lettering visible along the bottom edge. "Russian military intelligence," James observed. "SVR or GRU?" A muscle twitched in Donovan's jaw, but he remained silent. "It doesn't matter," James continued. "What matters is you're not Homeland Security and you are taking us somewhere off the grid. Why? What's your connection to Daniel Harrison and Project Prometheus?" The name triggered a reaction, a brief flicker of the eyes that told James he'd struck a nerve. "James," Sarah's voice cut through the tension, "there's a roadblock ahead." James twisted to look through the windshield. Sure enough, 2 police cruisers had been positioned across the rural road about a quarter-mile ahead, lights flashing. Officers in tactical gear stood at ready positions. "Slow down gradually," he instructed. "Those are real police. I recognize the county sheriff's cruisers." "And if they're not?" Sarah asked, the day's events having thoroughly destroyed her trust in appearances. It was a valid concern. "Then we'll know soon enough. But right now, legitimate law enforcement is our best chance." As they approached the roadblock, James kept the gun pressed firmly against Donovan but concealed from external view. Max remained vigilant in the back seat, his eyes never leaving their prisoner. A uniformed officer approached cautiously, hand resting on his holstered weapon. When he reached the driver's window, his eyes widened at the incongruous sight of a bride behind the wheel. "Mrs. Harrison?" he asked, recognition dawning. "We've been looking for you." Chief Carson put out an alert. Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God. This man," she nodded toward Donovan, "and his associates impersonated federal agents and tried to abduct us." The officer's expression hardened as he took in the scene, including the injured driver and the weapon James was holding. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to hand over that firearm, slowly and carefully." James complied, using proper procedure for surrendering a weapon to law enforcement. "I'm James Cooper, retired Sergeant, Pine Ridge PD. This man and his team claim to be Homeland Security but were taking us to an unknown location. The real DHS team arrived at Rosewood Manor after we'd been removed. Additional officers approached, securing Donovan and the injured driver. Max remained alert but calm, recognizing legitimate law enforcement personnel. "We received the alert from Chief Carson about 20 minutes ago," the officer explained as his colleagues took charge of the prisoners. "Said you were being transported by unauthorized personnel claiming federal authority. We've been setting up checkpoints on all routes leading away from the manor." "Any word on the other suspects?" James asked. There were at least 3 more in a second vehicle. "We have units searching the area. If they're still around, we'll find them." As the immediate danger subsided, Sarah finally gave in to the emotional toll of the day's events. Her poised demeanor crumbled, and she buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. James moved to comfort her, but it was Max who reached her first. The German Shepherd gently nudged her arm with his nose, offering the unconditional comfort that only animals seem capable of providing. Sarah wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his fur. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "Who is my husband? What is Project Prometheus? Why would Russian operatives be impersonating federal agents to abduct us?" An unmarked sedan pulled up to the roadblock and Chief Carson emerged, his face etched with concern. He approached quickly, taking in the scene with a professional's eye. "James, Sarah, thank God you're all right." He nodded appreciatively at Max. "Good work, all of you. The actual Homeland Security team is securing the wedding venue and debriefing the guests. They want to speak with you as soon as possible." "Mark," James said, using his old colleague's first name. "What's going on? Why is DHS involved, and why were Russian operatives trying to intercept us?" Carson glanced around, clearly uncomfortable discussing sensitive matters in the open. "Not here. We need to get you both to a secure location. The real one this time," he added with a grim smile. "I'm not going anywhere until someone explains what my husband is involved in," Sarah stated firmly, her composure returning despite the tear tracks staining her cheeks. "I deserve that much." Carson hesitated, then sighed heavily. "You're right, you do, but it's complicated and potentially very dangerous. What I can tell you is that Daniel Harrison isn't just a businessman. He's been working with U.S. intelligence on a critical cybersecurity initiative. And based on what happened today, it appears that project has been compromised." "And me?" Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. "Was I just part of his cover?" Carson's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "That's something only Daniel can answer. But right now, we need to focus on keeping you both safe. Because if the Russians were willing to go to these lengths to grab you, it means you know something vital, whether you realize it or not." The implications hung in the air as police officers secured the scene around them. Whatever Project Prometheus was, it had turned a wedding day into a battlefield of international espionage. And somewhere in the midst of it all was Daniel Harrison, the groom who had vanished, leaving his bride with nothing but questions and danger. The safe house was a nondescript colonial on the outskirts of Hartford, its ordinary appearance belying the sophisticated security systems hidden within its walls. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, still wearing her wedding dress, now wrinkled and stained from the day's ordeal, while two DHS agents stood guard outside. Max lay at her feet, his protective instincts keeping him close to the person he sensed was most vulnerable. James paced the living room, his conversation with Chief Carson and a man who had identified himself as Assistant Director Thomas Walsh of Homeland Security growing increasingly heated. "You're telling me that Daniel Harrison has been developing a cybersecurity system for the government, and that's why Russian operatives crashed his wedding?" James's skepticism was evident in his tone. "There has to be more to it." Walsh, a trim man in his 50s with a military bearing and carefully neutral expression, clasped his hands behind his back. "Project Prometheus isn't just a cybersecurity system, Mr. Cooper. It's potentially the most significant advancement in digital infrastructure protection since the internet was developed. If successfully implemented, it would render traditional hacking methods obsolete. You can imagine why certain foreign powers would be interested in acquiring it or preventing its deployment." "And Daniel's role in this?" Sarah asked, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived at the safe house. "Is he a developer, investor, or something else entirely?" Walsh and Carson exchanged glances, a silent negotiation about how much to reveal. "Your husband," Walsh began carefully, "is the primary architect of Prometheus. He founded his technology company as a legitimate business, but its true purpose has always been to serve as cover for his classified work. Only a handful of people know his actual role." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the glass of water before her. "So our entire relationship has been a lie, a cover story for his real work?" "Not necessarily," Carson interjected, his expression softening. "From what we understand, Daniel went to great lengths to keep his private life separate from his government work. His feelings for you could be entirely genuine. Could be, Sarah repeated bitterly. That's not exactly reassuring. James stopped pacing to stand supportively behind Sarah's chair. Why would Russian intelligence risk exposing themselves by attempting to abduct the wife of a government contractor in broad daylight? What could Sarah possibly know that would justify that level of risk? Walsh's expression grew more serious. That's what concerns us. The Russians must believe Mrs. Harrison has access to information or materials related to Prometheus, something valuable enough to warrant an operation on American soil that would provoke a significant diplomatic incident if exposed. But I don't know anything, Sarah protested. Daniel never discussed his work with me in detail. I knew his company developed security software, but nothing beyond that. Sometimes, Walsh said carefully, information can be transferred without the recipient's knowledge. A file sent to a shared device, a password saved in a browser you both use, or even physical media hidden somewhere you might access. Like our honeymoon destination, Sarah realized suddenly. We were supposed to fly to the Maldives tomorrow. Private villa, completely isolated. Walsh nodded. The perfect place for a handoff, voluntary or otherwise. Daniel might have planned to share something with you there, or the Russians might have believed they could extract information from you without interference. The implications hung heavy in the air. If their honeymoon had been selected for operational purposes rather than romance, what else in their relationship had been calculated? Where is Daniel now? Sarah asked, her voice steadier than James would have expected given the circumstances. Again, that exchange of glances between Walsh and Carson. Finally, the DHS official answered, "We don't know. He vanished during the commotion at the wedding. His car was found abandoned at a shopping mall 20 miles from Rosewood Manor. We're actively searching for him, but so far no success." "Is he running from the Russians or from you?" James asked pointedly. "That," Walsh admitted, "is the million-dollar question." Max suddenly raised his head, ears perked forward. A moment later they all heard it, the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching. Walsh checked his phone. "That's our transport. We need to move you to a more secure facility, Mrs. Harrison. The Russians know about this safe house network." "I'm not going anywhere without James and Max," Sarah stated firmly, rising from her chair. "Mrs. Harrison, it's non-negotiable, Director Walsh. They've saved my life twice today. I trust them more than I trust any federal agent at this point." Walsh looked like he wanted to argue, but caught the determined set of her jaw, a clear indicator that this was a battle he wouldn't win. "Fine. The dog might actually be useful if we encounter any further security issues. But I must insist that you change out of that dress. You're far too recognizable in it." 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the bedroom in borrowed clothes, jeans, a sweatshirt, and running shoes that approximately fit her slender frame. She'd pulled her hair back into a simple ponytail, all traces of the elaborate bridal styling gone. Only the diamond engagement ring and matching wedding band remained as evidence of her interrupted nuptials. The helicopter landed in an adjacent field, its rotors throwing dust and grass into swirling patterns. With Max trotting protectively alongside Sarah, the group made their way from the house to the waiting aircraft. James noticed that Walsh kept scanning the surrounding area, one hand inside his jacket, where a weapon undoubtedly waited. Once aboard and safely in the air, Walsh handed Sarah a tablet computer. "We need you to look at these photographs. They're images of everyone who attended your wedding today. Tell us if you notice anyone who shouldn't have been there, or anyone acting unusually." Sarah flipped through the surveillance photos, most taken discreetly as guests were processed and released from the manor. Occasionally she paused, examining a face more closely before moving on. "That's odd," she murmured, stopping on an image of an older man in catering attire. "I don't recognize him, but he's wearing a server's uniform from La Maison Blanche. That's not who we hired. Our caterer was Elegant Affairs." Walsh leaned forward with newfound intensity. Are you certain? Absolutely. I spent months selecting Elegant Affairs specifically for their gluten-free options. This uniform is from their main competitor. The DHS director immediately relayed this information via a secure line, ordering immediate identification and location of the imposter. As Sarah continued through the photos, Max rested his head on her lap, the helicopter's vibrations and engine noise seeming not to bother him in the slightest. James marveled at the dog's adaptability, from detecting explosives in war zones to finding a listening device in a wedding cake. Max's training and natural abilities made him an asset in any crisis. Wait, Sarah said suddenly, her finger hovering over the screen. Who's this woman talking to Daniel's mother? I don't recognize her at all. Walsh examined the image. According to our guest manifest, that's Catherine Wilford, a cousin of Victoria Harrison. Sarah shook her head firmly. Daniel doesn't have a cousin, Catherine. I've met all his extended family. His mother made sure of it. This woman is an imposter. The helicopter banked sharply as they changed course, responding to new instructions in the pilot's headset. Walsh's expression had darkened considerably. It appears the situation is more compromised than we realized, he said grimly. We've just received intelligence that the actual Catherine Wilford was found unconscious in her hotel room this morning before the wedding. Someone has been gathering intelligence from within your inner circle, Mrs. Harrison. Call me Sarah, she replied absently, her focus still on the tablet. If we're going to be hunted by Russian spies together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Despite the gravity of the situation, James couldn't help but admire her resilience. Robert Mitchell's daughter was made of stern stuff indeed. There's something else, Sarah said, swiping to another image. This man, the one speaking with the string quartet during setup, he's not part of the band, and he's certainly not on our guest list. Walsh took the tablet, studying the image before showing it to James. Recognize him? James did. The man had been briefly visible at the roadblock where they'd escaped their captors, watching from a distance before disappearing into the woods. He'd assumed it was one of the Russians from the second SUV, but hadn't gotten a clear enough look to be certain. He was at the ambush site, James confirmed, observing, not participating directly. This is deeper than we thought, Walsh muttered, more to himself than to them. Multiple infiltration points, coordinated surveillance, attempted extraction. This isn't just about stealing technology. They're treating this like a military operation. The helicopter communication system crackled to life with an urgent message. Walsh listened intently before his face paled slightly. Change of plans, he announced. We've just received word that our destination facility has been compromised. We need to divert to an alternate location. Compromised how? James demanded, his instincts for danger sharpening. 2 security guards found dead, systems disabled. Walsh's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine concern. Whoever these people are, they're eliminating every safe location we have. Almost as if they have inside information, James finished for him. Someone with knowledge of your protocols and secure facilities. The implication hung heavily in the helicopter's confined space. Either Daniel Harrison had betrayed his government connections, or someone inside the American intelligence community was working with the Russians. Either way, the danger was far from over. And as Max raised his head alertly from Sarah's lap, ears pricked forward as if sensing the tension, James knew they were flying into the heart of a conspiracy that had already proven its willingness to kill. The helicopter touched down on a secluded helipad, nestled within the sprawling grounds of what appeared to be a private estate. Gothic spires rose against the darkening sky as dusk settled over the Connecticut countryside. Walsh had remained tight-lipped about their new destination during the flight, communicating only in hushed tones with his team through a secure headset. Welcome to Blackwood, he announced as the rotors slowed. It's not on any official registry. Private property owned through a series of shell corporations. Even most of DHS doesn't know it exists. Whose house is this? Sarah asked, pulling the borrowed sweatshirt tighter around herself against the evening chill. Technically, yours. Walsh's revelation landed like a stone in still water. Or rather, your husband's. Daniel purchased it through one of his subsidiary companies 3 years ago, but kept it off all official records. We only learned about it 6 months ago when he offered it as a potential safe house for the Prometheus project. Sarah's face registered shock, then bitter amusement. 3 years ago, before we even met. She shook her head slowly. Another secret. Armed security personnel approached, surrounding the helicopter at a respectful distance. Max remained close to Sarah, his body language cautious but not aggressive as he assessed these new humans. James studied the massive stone mansion with a professional eye. Defensible position, limited access points, good sight lines. He nodded appreciatively. Your husband may have kept secrets, Sarah, but he chose his bolt hole wisely. We've had it retrofitted with state-of-the-art security systems, Walsh explained as they were escorted toward the main entrance. Biometric access, surveillance coverage of every square inch of the grounds, and a panic room that could withstand a direct missile strike. The interior of Blackwood was a stark contrast to its medieval exterior. Modern minimalist furnishings populated cavernous rooms with vaulted ceilings. Art pieces worth millions adorned walls alongside cutting-edge technology, massive screens displaying security feeds, weather patterns, and what appeared to be real-time global news monitoring. Daniel spent time here, Sarah observed quietly, her fingers trailing along a bookshelf stocked with technical manuals and first-edition classics. These are his favorites: Dostoevsky, Nabokov, Asimov. Her voice caught slightly. He told me he discovered Russian literature during a college semester abroad. Was that true, I wonder, or part of his cover story? Walsh directed them to a large conference room dominated by a gleaming table. Please sit. We need to debrief properly now that we're secure. Max circled the room methodically, nose twitching as he investigated this new environment. His behavior was relaxed but vigilant, a good sign, James knew. The dog's instincts for danger had proven more reliable than human intelligence throughout this ordeal. A wall screen flickered to life, displaying a photograph of Daniel Harrison, not the polished businessman from wedding photos, but a focused, intense figure in casual clothes, working at a complex computer setup. 3 weeks ago, Walsh began, Daniel reported concerns that Project Prometheus had been compromised. He believed someone had attempted to access the core algorithms from within the secure development environment. The intrusion was sophisticated enough that it had to be an inside job, someone with high-level clearance. Why not just shut the project down at that point? James asked. Secure the code and start fresh? Walsh's expression tightened. That was our recommendation. Daniel refused. He insisted that Prometheus was too important to delay, especially with mounting cyber threats from Russia and China. Instead, he proposed a decentralization protocol. Meaning what exactly? Sarah's eyes remained fixed on her husband's image. He split the core components of Prometheus into 3 separate parts, each independently useless, but together forming the complete system. One part remained in the secure development environment. The second was transferred to an isolated quantum computer at a black site facility. And the third? James prompted, though he suspected the answer. The third, Walsh confirmed, was kept by Daniel personally. He claimed it was the only way to ensure the system couldn't be compromised or weaponized without his knowledge. Sarah leaned forward. So when he disappeared from our wedding, we believe he took his portion of Prometheus with him. And if the Russians get their hands on it, They could potentially reconstruct enough of the system to compromise our entire cybersecurity infrastructure. The weight of this revelation settled over the room. Max, sensing the tension, returned to Sarah's side, resting his head on her knee in a gesture of comfort. "One thing doesn't make sense," James said after a moment. "If Daniel was so concerned about security, why proceed with a high-profile wedding? Why not postpone it until the situation was resolved?" Walsh hesitated, glancing at Sarah before answering. He insisted the wedding proceed as planned, said canceling would trigger too many questions, potentially alerting whoever was after Prometheus that he was onto them. "So I was bait," Sarah whispered, her hands instinctively finding Max's fur, seeking comfort in its solidity. A distraction while he, ran? Hid the final piece of his precious project? "We don't know," Walsh admitted. His last communication with his handler was at 11:43 this morning, shortly before the ceremony. He reported that he believed he had identified the mole, but needed to confirm before taking action. He was supposed to check in during the reception, but never did. A young analyst entered the room and whispered something urgently to Walsh, whose expression darkened further. "What is it?" James demanded. "We've identified 3 of the Russian operatives from the wedding. They're part of a specialized SVR unit known for technology acquisition. But the 4th individual, the observer you identified from the roadblock, remains a mystery. Facial recognition has found no matches in any intelligence database." "A ghost," James murmured. "Professional enough to avoid being photographed or fingerprinted." "A handler," Walsh corrected. "Someone senior enough to coordinate the operation but remain in the shadows." Max suddenly lifted his head from Sarah's knee, his attention drawn to something outside human perception. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. James was instantly alert. "What is it, boy?" The German shepherd moved toward the door, nose working rapidly, posture signaling concern rather than immediate threat. Walsh opened his mouth to dismiss the dog's behavior, but James silenced him with a sharp gesture. "Max doesn't alert without reason. Something's wrong." As if confirming his handler's trust, Max barked once, sharp and authoritative, and pawed at the floor near the west-facing wall. Walsh frowned, pulling out his phone. "Security check, all zones. Immediate response." He listened to the reply, his frown deepening. "Everything's clear. All perimeter sensors are negative." James moved to Max's side, running his hands along the wall where the dog was indicating interest. "Is there anything behind this wall? A passage, mechanical room, anything?" "It's a solid exterior wall," Walsh replied, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The only thing on the other side is—" A thunderous crash interrupted him as the wall exploded inward, showering the room with debris. Max lunged, pushing Sarah to the floor and covering her with his body as chunks of stone and plaster rained down around them. James dropped for cover, pulling his confiscated weapon from his waistband. Through the swirling dust and smoke, armed figures in tactical gear breached the opening. Their movements were precise, professional, military training evident in every calculated step. They weren't wearing any insignia, but their equipment was top tier in uniform, suggesting a well-funded operation. Walsh had drawn his own weapon and managed to fire twice before a burst of return fire caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Security alarms finally blared throughout the mansion, too late to prevent the incursion. "Targets acquired," one of the intruders announced in accented English. "Secure the woman in the drive, eliminate the others." James fired from his position behind an overturned table, forcing the lead attacker to seek cover. "Sarah, run! Get to the panic room," Walsh mentioned. Max had already positioned himself between Sarah and the intruders, his teeth bared in a fearsome display that momentarily gave the attackers pause. One raised his weapon toward the dog, but Sarah acted with surprising speed, grabbing a heavy crystal paperweight from the table and hurling it with remarkable accuracy. It struck the man's hand, disrupting his aim as his shot went wide. "The dog is trained! Watch the dog!" someone shouted as Max launched himself at the nearest attacker, a blur of focused aggression that sent the man stumbling backward into his companions. In the momentary confusion, James grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward a side door, Walsh's security team finally responding with covering fire from the hallway. Max disengaged from his target at James's whistle, racing to rejoin them as they fled the compromised conference room. "How did they find us?" Sarah gasped as they ran, following Walsh's security detail through unfamiliar corridors. "This place was supposed to be completely secure." James had no answer, but the implications were chilling. Either Daniel had betrayed the safe house location, or someone in Walsh's inner circle was feeding information to the attackers. As gunfire echoed behind them, Sarah stumbled, nearly falling before James steadied her. Max remained close, his training evident in his controlled movements despite the chaos. "Director Walsh," she began. "Can't help him now," James cut her off grimly. "We need to focus on getting you to safety." The security team directed them toward a reinforced door at the end of a windowless hallway, the panic room Walsh had mentioned. As they approached, Max suddenly froze, hackles raised, blocking their path with a low, warning growl. "What is it, boy?" James asked, immediately alert to the dog's signal. The security agent in the lead grew impatient. "We don't have time for this. The panic room is our only option." But Max wouldn't budge, his warning growing more intense as he positioned himself to prevent Sarah from approaching the door. James had learned to trust Max's instincts without question. "Something's wrong with the panic room. Max is telling us it's not safe." "That's impossible," the agent insisted. "It's the most secure location in the building." "Unless," Sarah realized with dawning horror, "someone compromised it before we arrived." Her eyes met James's, understanding passing between them. The same people who killed the guards at the other facility. An explosion rocked the far end of the corridor, sending them ducking for cover as the battle for Blackwood intensified. Caught between approaching hostiles and a potentially compromised safe room, their options were rapidly diminishing. And through it all, Max remained firm in his warning. Something deadly awaited behind that reinforced door. "If we can't go forward, we need to find another way out," James said, assessing their increasingly dire situation. The sounds of gunfire were drawing closer, the security team exchanging fire with the intruders at the far end of the corridor. One of the agents pressed his hand to his earpiece, listening intently before turning to them with urgency. "East wing is compromised, west wing under heavy assault. Backup is at least 15 minutes out." "Too late," James muttered. He looked to Sarah. "This is your husband's property. Would he have built in escape routes that wouldn't be on the official plans?" Sarah's eyes widened with sudden realization. The study. Daniel always insisted on designing his own workspaces, even in our home. She pointed to a door midway down the hall. "Through there. If this place follows the same layout as his other properties, there should be a concealed exit." The lead security agent shook his head. "Ma'am, we have no confirmation of—" "We're trusting her," James interrupted firmly. "Max agrees with the assessment." The German shepherd had indeed relaxed his warning posture about the panic room and was now alert to Sarah's suggestion, almost as if he understood her words. With the decision made, they moved quickly toward the study door, the remaining security team providing covering fire as the first of the attackers appeared at the corridor's end. Max stayed close to Sarah, his body language protective yet responsive to James's subtle hand signals, the product of years of partnership. The study was a masculine space of dark wood and leather, dominated by a massive desk with multiple embedded screens. Sarah moved immediately to the bookshelf behind it, her fingers tracing the spines with purpose. Daniel has a thing for hidden passages, she explained, pulling on a specific volume, a first edition of Asimov's Foundation. He showed me his secret room at our house in Boston, said it was a childhood dream to have hidden doors in his home. With a soft click, a section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "Go," the lead agent urged them. "We'll hold them off as long as possible." James hesitated. "Come with us." The man shook his head grimly. "That's not the mission. Mrs. Harrison's safety is the priority." He pressed something into James's hand, a satellite phone. "Emergency protocols are pre-programmed. Once you're clear, call it in." There was no time for further discussion. The door to the study burst open as the first of the attackers breached their position. The security agents opened fire immediately, creating the covering distraction they needed. "Max, with me," James commanded, ushering Sarah into the passage before following himself. Max entered last, and James pulled the hidden door closed behind them just as an explosion rocked the study. The passageway was dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor, leading downward in a gentle slope. They moved quickly, the sounds of battle growing fainter behind them. "Daniel's always been paranoid about security," Sarah explained as they descended. "Long before I knew him, apparently. He used to joke that growing up during the fall of the Soviet Union gave him a healthy distrust of stability." The passage opened into a small underground garage housing a single vehicle, a rugged, all-terrain SUV with no license plates or identifying marks. "Convenient," James observed, checking the vehicle for potential traps before opening the driver's door. The keys were in the ignition, almost as if someone expected to need a quick escape. Sarah circled to the passenger side, Max following closely. At this point, nothing would surprise me. She paused, noticing something on a workbench against the wall. "Wait, that's Daniel's laptop." James followed her gaze to a sleek black computer sitting innocuously beside toolkits and emergency supplies. "He never goes anywhere without it," Sarah continued, moving toward the bench. "It's customized, built to his specifications with security features that would make the NSA jealous. He wouldn't leave it behind accidentally." She opened the laptop, which immediately illuminated with a login screen. After a moment's hesitation, she typed in a password. The system rejected it. She tried again with a different combination, another rejection. "Try your wedding date," James suggested. Sarah's laugh was hollow. That would be too sentimental for a man who apparently lives a double life. Nevertheless, she entered the date, 05/14/2023. To her evident surprise, the screen unlocked. "Maybe not everything was a lie," James offered gently. The desktop contained only a single file, a video labeled "For Sarah." With trembling fingers, she clicked on it. Daniel's face filled the screen, his expression grave but composed. Unlike the polished groom who had stood at the altar hours earlier, this Daniel looked haggard, with several days' stubble and shadows under his eyes. "Sarah, if you're watching this, then things have gone very wrong, and I owe you more explanations than this video can provide. First, I want you to know that my love for you is real, the only truly real thing in this mess I've created." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a gesture Sarah clearly recognized from his moments of deepest stress. Project Prometheus isn't what everyone thinks. Yes, it's a cybersecurity system, but its capabilities go far beyond defense. In the right hands, it could secure digital infrastructure against any attack. In the wrong hands, he paused, swallowing hard. In the wrong hands, it could be used to penetrate any security system on Earth, rendering all digital protections obsolete. Sarah's hand went to her mouth, the implications sinking in. "I built backdoors into the system, safeguards to prevent misuse, but someone in our government wants those removed. They see Prometheus not as a shield, but as the ultimate cyber weapon. I refused to complete it without the ethical constraints, so they found someone willing to do what I wouldn't. Daniel leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping. The mole isn't Russian, Sarah. The threat is coming from inside our own intelligence community. Someone very high up who stands to make billions selling a weaponized version of Prometheus to the highest bidder. Max suddenly growled, his attention turning to the passage they had used to enter the garage. James immediately tensed, drawing his weapon. There's no time, Daniel continued in the video, as if anticipating their situation. In the SUV's glove compartment, you'll find a quantum encryption key. It contains my third of Prometheus, but more importantly, it has evidence identifying the traitor. Get it to Amanda Chen at the Washington Post. She's the only journalist I trust not to be compromised. Sounds of pursuit echoed from the passage. Boots on concrete, voices giving tactical commands. I'm sorry for involving you in this, Sarah. Sorry that our wedding day became part of this nightmare. Whether you can ever forgive me or not, please know that what we had was real. I love you. Now go. The video ended abruptly. Sarah sat frozen for a moment before James's urgent voice broke through. Sarah, we need to move now. She grabbed the laptop, slamming it closed and clutching it to her chest as they rushed to the SUV. Max leaped into the back seat as James took the driver's position and Sarah the passenger side. The glove compartment, James reminded her as he started the engine. Sarah opened it, finding a small metallic device about the size of a cigarette lighter. This must be the encryption key he mentioned. The garage door began to rise automatically as the SUV's engine turned over, revealing a steep driveway leading up to what appeared to be dense woodland. James didn't wait for it to open fully, accelerating forward as soon as there was clearance. Behind them, the first of their pursuers emerged from the passage, firing wildly at the departing vehicle. Bullets pinged off the SUV's rear, suggesting it had been armored, another of Daniel's paranoid precautions that was now saving their lives. They burst from the hidden garage exit into the gathering darkness, headlights illuminating a narrow track through the forest. James pushed the vehicle to its limits, navigating the rough terrain with the skill of someone who had driven in far worse conditions during his police career. "Did you know?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice unnaturally calm as she clutched the encryption key and laptop. When Max alerted to the cake, "Did you know it would lead to all this?" "No," James answered honestly, checking the rearview mirror for pursuit. But Max has always had a nose for trouble bigger than what's immediately apparent. In our K9 unit days, he once found a weapons cache when we were only searching for a single missing gun. Some dogs just have a gift for finding the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried. Max, as if recognizing the praise, rested his muzzle on the back of the seat between them, his warm breath a comforting presence. They reached a paved road, and James turned onto it, accelerating away from Blackwood and the chaos they'd left behind. The satellite phone the agent had given him lay on the console between them, but he made no move to use it. "You're not calling it in," Sarah observed. "Not until we know who to trust," James confirmed. "Your husband's warning about internal corruption means everyone's a potential threat now." Sarah nodded, absently stroking Max's head as the dog maintained his vigilant position. "Where do we go? The Russians are after us, our own government might be compromised, and my husband has disappeared with a third of a cyber weapon that apparently could destabilize the entire world." "Washington," James decided. "If Daniel trusted this journalist, Amanda Chen, then that's our best option, but we need to be careful. No credit cards, no phones, nothing that could be traced." "Can we make it?" Sarah asked, looking out at the darkening landscape. "It's at least 5 hours to DC. James's expression was grim but determined. "We don't have a choice. Whatever's on that encryption key is important enough that people are willing to kill for it. And right now, the three of us may be the only ones standing between Prometheus and those who would use it as a weapon." As they sped through the night, Max settled into the back seat, but remained alert, his ears occasionally pricking at sounds beyond human perception. The dog, who had discovered a listening device in a wedding cake, was now part of a desperate race to prevent a global cybersecurity catastrophe. A journey that had begun with a simple alert that something wasn't right with the dessert. None of them could have predicted where Max's nose would lead them, but there was no turning back now. The truth, like the road ahead, was unfolding one dangerous mile at a time. The darkness of rural Connecticut enveloped the SUV as James navigated back roads and state highways, deliberately avoiding major interstates and toll roads where cameras might track their passage. Sarah sat in tense silence beside him, Daniel's laptop clutched to her chest like a shield, the quantum encryption key secured in her pocket. In the back seat, Max maintained his vigilant presence, occasionally shifting position, but never fully relaxing his guard. "We need supplies," James said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. "Cash, food, maybe a change of clothes. We can't show up in D.C. with you still in borrowed sweats and me looking like I just survived a firefight." Sarah nodded absently, her mind clearly elsewhere. "There's cash in the center console. Daniel always kept emergency funds in his vehicles." Sure enough, the compartment contained a sealed envelope with $5,000 in various denominations. Another of Daniel Harrison's contingency plans, further evidence of a man who had lived his life preparing for worst-case scenarios. "Your husband thought of everything," James observed, pulling into the lot of a 24-hour superstore in a small town far enough from Blackwood that news of the attack wouldn't have reached it yet. "Except how to be honest with his wife," Sarah replied, the bitterness in her voice tempered by exhaustion. Her fingers traced the edges of the laptop. "I keep trying to reconcile the man I married with the man in this video. The man who built a weapon so dangerous that people are willing to kill for it. He tried to build in safeguards," James reminded her gently, "and he trusted you with the truth in the end." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Only after everything fell apart." She sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "I'm sorry. I'm angry and confused and scared, and it's easier to blame Daniel than to accept that our entire government might be compromised." James reached over and squeezed her hand briefly before turning his attention to their immediate needs. "I'll go in and get supplies. You and Max stay with the vehicle. If anything seems off, anything at all, drive away and don't look back. Head south. Find a place to lay low, and I'll find a way to contact you." Sarah looked alarmed. "We're not splitting up." "It's safer if only one of us is visible on the store cameras," James explained, "and Max will protect you better than I could anyway." Max's ears perked up at the mention of his name, his dark eyes moving between them with intelligent focus. 20 minutes, James promised. "If I'm not back by then, assume something's wrong." Inside the store, James moved efficiently, selecting essentials while maintaining awareness of his surroundings. Clothing in approximately the right sizes, basic toiletries, a first aid kit, bottled water, non-perishable food, and a prepaid cell phone. He paid in cash, keeping his face angled away from security cameras as much as possible without appearing suspicious. As he exited the store, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot, moving slowly past the rows of vehicles. Something about its deliberate pace triggered James's instincts. He diverted his path, using a row of shopping carts as cover while he observed the vehicle. Two men inside, both with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement or military. The sedan passed the SUV where Sarah and Max waited, then circled back for a second look. James abandoned his shopping cart and took a circuitous route back to their vehicle, approaching from the blind side. Sarah spotted him in the side mirror and reached across to unlock the driver's door. "We've got company," he said quietly as he slid behind the wheel, passing the shopping bags to the back seat. Black sedan, 2 o'clock. They've made 2 passes already. Sarah tensed, her hand moving to Max's head in an unconscious gesture, seeking comfort. How did they find us so quickly? They might not be looking specifically for us, James reasoned, starting the engine. Could be a general alert for suspicious vehicles or persons of interest. Either way, we're not sticking around to find out. He pulled out of the parking space, driving unhurriedly toward the exit. The black sedan made another turn, positioning itself to intercept them. They're definitely interested, Sarah observed, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. James nodded grimly. Hold on. He abruptly changed direction, cutting across empty parking spaces toward a secondary exit on the far side of the lot. The sedan accelerated in pursuit, its engine roaring as the driver abandoned any pretense of casual interest. "Federal agents," a voice announced over a loudspeaker. "Stop your vehicle immediately." "Are they real federal agents or fake ones like before?" Sarah asked, clutching the door handle as James executed a sharp turn onto a service road. "Does it matter?" James replied grimly. "Either way, they want what you're carrying." The sedan was gaining on them, its superior engine power evident. Max growled from the back seat, his posture alert as he braced himself against the SUV's movements. "There's something else in the glove compartment," Sarah said suddenly, reaching inside and producing a small metal device. "It looks like some kind of electronic jammer." James glanced at it briefly. "Activate it. Might disrupt their communications." Sarah pressed the single button on the device, which emitted a soft blue light. Almost immediately, the sedan pursuing them swerved erratically, as if the driver had been momentarily disoriented. "Whatever that thing is, it's working," James observed, using the opportunity to increase their lead. He turned onto a narrow country road, killing the headlights and navigating by moonlight, a risky maneuver, but necessary to disappear into the rural darkness. After several miles of tense silence, with no sign of further pursuit, James finally allowed himself to relax slightly. "I think we lost them. That device must have done more than just jam communications." Sarah studied the small metal object with newfound respect. Daniel's specialty was creating systems that could disable other systems. This must be a prototype. She carefully returned it to the glove compartment. "So much of our life together makes more sense now. The late nights, the secured home office, the business trips on short notice." "He was trying to protect you by keeping you separate from his work," James suggested. "By lying to me," Sarah corrected, though with less anger than before. She opened Daniel's laptop again, studying the paused image of her husband's face. "But he did love me. Despite everything, I believe that part was real." Max whined softly from the back seat, resting his chin on her shoulder in a gesture of canine comfort. "I've been thinking about what he said in the video," Sarah continued, absently stroking Max's fur. "About someone high up in intelligence who stands to make billions selling Prometheus. It would have to be someone with both the authority to direct classified projects and connections to potential buyers." James nodded thoughtfully. "And the power to mobilize multiple teams to hunt you down after you escaped." "There's one name that keeps coming to mind," Sarah said hesitantly. "Lawrence Ellis, the National Security Advisor. He's been at our home several times for dinner parties. Daniel always seemed tense around him, though I assumed it was just the natural deference to someone so powerful." "Ellis would certainly have the authority," James agreed. "But that's a serious accusation. We'd need hard evidence." Sarah tapped the encryption key in her pocket, which is presumably what this contains. They drove in contemplative silence for several miles before Sarah spoke again, her voice softer. "Thank you, James, for everything. I know this isn't what you expected when you came to my wedding." James chuckled despite the gravity of their situation. "I'm fairly certain your father is looking down right now, shaking his head and saying, 'I told you that dog was special.'" As if recognizing the reference, Max gave a soft woof from the back seat. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile since the chaos began. Dad always did say Max was the best partner you ever had. He wasn't wrong, James replied, reaching back to ruffle the German Shepherd's fur. Max has always had a talent for finding the truth, even when it's hidden inside a wedding cake. The miles continued to pass as they made their way south toward Washington, D.C., each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah eventually dozed off, exhaustion finally overcoming adrenaline, her head resting against the window, while Daniel's laptop remained clutched protectively in her arms. James checked the rearview mirror for the 100th time, more out of habit than expectation of seeing pursuit. Max caught his eye in the reflection, the dog's steady gaze somehow reassuring. "We'll get her through this, boy," James murmured, "whatever it takes." As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they crossed into Maryland, now just an hour from Washington. James stopped at a rest area to change into the clothes he'd purchased and allow Max a brief walk. Sarah remained asleep, the lines of worry temporarily smoothed from her face. His new prepaid phone showed no signal, not surprising in the rural area. Once they reached the capital, he would need to find a way to contact Amanda Chen without exposing themselves prematurely. The journalist might be their only hope of exposing the conspiracy before Ellis or whoever was behind this could silence them permanently. What had started with a dog's alert at a wedding reception had escalated into a race to prevent a global catastrophe. As James watched Max diligently patrolling the perimeter of the rest area, he marveled at the chain of events the German Shepherd had set in motion. A listening device in a cake had led them to a conspiracy at the highest levels of government, a cybersecurity weapon that could change the balance of global power, and a bride whose wedding day had transformed into a desperate flight for survival. And soon they would arrive in Washington, D.C., the heart of American power and, potentially, the center of the corruption they were racing to expose. Whatever awaited them there, James knew one thing with absolute certainty. The bond between handler and dog, forged through years of trust and partnership, would be their strongest asset in the challenges to come. Washington, D.C. emerged on the horizon, its iconic monuments gleaming in the morning sunlight. James had chosen a circuitous approach, avoiding major highways and known surveillance points. Sarah was awake now, her face set with determination, as they entered the capital city that housed both their best hope for salvation and the architect of their persecution. "The Washington Post building is downtown," she said, studying a map on the prepaid phone James had purchased. "But we can't just walk in. If Ellis is behind this, he'll have people watching all the obvious locations." "We need to draw Amanda Chen out," James agreed, navigating the morning traffic with careful anonymity. "Somewhere public enough to be safe, but private enough to talk." Max sat alert in the back seat, his demeanor changing subtly as they entered the more densely populated urban environment. His training in crowded settings was evident in his focused vigilance, ears constantly adjusting to process the city's cacophony while maintaining awareness of potential threats. They found a parking garage several blocks from the National Mall and left the SUV on the third level, deliberately choosing a spot without direct camera coverage. Before leaving, Sarah hesitated, her hand on Daniel's laptop. "We should take this with us," she said, "but it's too conspicuous." James nodded, reaching into one of the shopping bags. "I bought a backpack. We can carry the laptop and the encryption key more discreetly." Once they had transferred the crucial items, James attached a leash to Max's collar, a necessary pretense in the city, though the dog needed no guidance to stay close. With Sarah wearing a nondescript baseball cap and sunglasses, they emerged onto the streets of Washington looking like ordinary tourists with their dog. "I've been thinking about how to contact Chen without exposing ourselves," James said as they walked. Direct approaches to the newspaper building or her home would be too obvious. What about social media? Sarah suggested. A message specific enough that she'd recognize it came from Daniel, but vague enough not to alert anyone monitoring her accounts. Worth a try, James agreed. They found a small coffee shop with free Wi-Fi and took a table in the corner, positioning themselves to watch both the entrance and the street outside. Max settled beneath the table, his body a reassuring presence against their legs. Sarah created a temporary email account and drafted a message to Amanda Chen's public work address. Foundation Trilogy discussion from Princeton Conference. The second foundation has been compromised. Mule seeks control. Same coffee shop, 1 hour. A friend of Hari Seldon. Daniel and Amanda met at a technology ethics conference at Princeton last year, Sarah explained. They both love Asimov's Foundation series. Daniel's computer password used elements from it. This message will make sense to her if they discuss the books. Let's hope she checks her email frequently, James said, checking his watch. It was just past 8:30 a.m. While they waited, James purchased a copy of the Washington Post from a nearby stand, scanning its pages for any mention of the events at Blackwood. There was nothing. Either the news hadn't broken yet or someone was suppressing it. Page 6, Sarah said suddenly, pointing to a small article near the bottom of the page. Look. The headline read, Tech CEO Daniel Harrison missing after wedding day security incident. The brief article mentioned a security concern at the wedding reception and that authorities were seeking Harrison for questioning, with no mention of the Russian operatives, the listening device, or the attack on Blackwood. They're controlling the narrative, James observed grimly, painting Daniel as someone who fled, possibly even as a suspect rather than a potential victim. Sarah's phone pinged with an incoming email. The response was equally cryptic. The Mule's psychohistorians are everywhere, original location compromised. Try the second branch of the library instead. 20 minutes. Come alone. AC. The second branch of the library, Sarah repeated, brow furrowed. What does that mean? James considered for a moment. The Library of Congress has multiple buildings. The original Jefferson Building and then the Adams Building, which would be the second. That has to be it, Sarah agreed, but she says to come alone. Not happening, James said firmly. Either we all go or none of us go. They finished their coffees and left the shop, making their way toward Capitol Hill, where the Library of Congress building stood. James remained vigilant, watching for any signs of surveillance as they approached the imposing structure of the Adams Building. Max will alert us if something's wrong, James assured Sarah as they climbed the steps. His instincts have been our best warning system so far. Inside, the reading room was sparsely populated on the early Monday morning. They spotted a woman sitting alone at a corner table, dark-rimmed glasses framing an intense expression as she pretended to read a thick volume. When she saw Sarah, a flash of recognition crossed her face, quickly suppressed. That's her, Sarah whispered. Amanda Chen. They approached casually, as if looking for a place to sit. Max walked calmly at James's side, but his body language communicated readiness, a subtle tension that his handler recognized immediately. Something's wrong, James murmured, scanning the room more carefully. He spotted them then, 2 men in suits at opposite ends of the reading room, ostensibly engaged with books but angled to observe Amanda's table. She's being watched, Sarah realized. James made a quick decision. Walk past her table, don't stop, just drop this note. He scribbled quickly on a scrap of paper. Then head for the restrooms. There should be a staff exit nearby. Sarah nodded, understanding the plan without further explanation. As they passed Amanda's table, she casually dropped the folded note beside the journalist's elbow. Amanda didn't react visibly, but her hand moved to cover the paper. They continued toward the back of the reading room, maintaining an unhurried pace despite the urgency thrumming through them. Just as they reached the corridor leading to the restrooms, Max stiffened, his attention fixing on a man approaching from the opposite direction, a man whose hand was reaching inside his jacket. "Run," James ordered quietly, releasing Max's leash with a subtle hand signal that the dog recognized instantly. As Sarah sprinted for the staff door at the end of the corridor, Max lunged forward with practiced precision, catching the approaching man's wrist in his powerful jaws. The man's cry of pain was quickly stifled as James delivered a sharp blow to his solar plexus, incapacitating him long enough to relieve him of the weapon he'd been reaching for. "Max, heel," James commanded, and the German shepherd released his grip, falling in beside his handler as they raced after Sarah, the sounds of pursuit already echoing behind them. They burst through the staff exit into a loading area where deliveries were received. Amanda Chen was already there, having followed the instructions in James's note. "My car's around the corner," she said without preamble. "We have about 2 minutes before they lock down the building." They followed her through a service alley to where a modest sedan waited. As they piled in, Amanda driving, Sarah in the passenger seat, James and Max in the back, the journalist finally spoke directly to Sarah. "Your husband said you might come. He contacted me 3 days ago, said if anything happened to him, you would have evidence that needed to be published. I've been waiting, watching the news about your wedding." 3 days ago, Sarah repeated, the timeline sinking in. He knew something was going to happen before the wedding even took place. Amanda nodded grimly, navigating through back streets with the confidence of a local. He said someone inside the government was trying to weaponize his project. He had proof but needed to secure it properly before coming forward. Said a lot of people would try to stop him, including some who were supposed to be on his side. Like National Security Advisor Ellis, James suggested. Amanda's sharp glance in the rearview mirror confirmed their suspicion. "Daniel wouldn't give me names over the phone, said it was too dangerous, but he said the evidence would be clear once I saw it." "It's on this," Sarah said, removing the quantum encryption key from her pocket, along with Daniel's part of Project Prometheus. They arrived at a nondescript apartment building in a quiet residential neighborhood. Amanda led them to a third-floor unit that had been converted into a makeshift office. "Welcome to my panic room," she said, securing multiple locks behind them. Faraday cage built into the walls. No electronic signals get in or out, unless I allow them. If your husband's encryption key contains what he claimed, this is the safest place in DC to access it. Sarah connected the device to Amanda's computer system, which immediately displayed a request for biometric authentication. "It wants a fingerprint," Sarah said, surprised. "But I don't have access to Daniel's." "Try yours," Amanda suggested. "If Daniel set this up as a contingency, he would have authorized someone he trusted." Sarah pressed her thumb to the scanner, half expecting rejection. Instead, the device unlocked immediately, displaying hundreds of files. "He did trust me," she whispered, the realization bringing fresh tears to her eyes. The files contained everything. Internal memos documenting Ellis's attempts to remove Prometheus's ethical constraints, offshore accounts showing payments from foreign entities, recorded conversations where the National Security Advisor discussed selling the weaponized system to both state and non-state actors who would pay billions for its capabilities. "This is bigger than I imagined," Amanda breathed, her journalistic instincts clearly firing on all cylinders. "This isn't just one corrupt official, it's a network. Ellis is just the American hub." As they processed the information, Max suddenly raised his head, ears alert to something outside human perception. A low growl rumbled in his chest, the same warning he'd given before every previous danger. James moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. "We've got company, multiple vehicles, tactical teams deploying." "How did they find us?" Sarah asked, fear edging her voice. It doesn't matter, Amanda said decisively, typing rapidly on her keyboard. I'm transmitting everything to my editors and trusted colleagues at 3 different news organizations, plus backup copies to international partners. Once it's out, they can't stop it. A pounding at the door confirmed the imminent threat. Federal agents, open up. Keep them talking, Amanda urged, fingers flying across the keys. I need 2 more minutes for the transfers to complete. James positioned himself between the door and the women, Max at his side, both prepared for what might be their final stand. I'm reaching for my identification, he called through the door, playing for time. James, Sarah said suddenly, her eyes fixed on a video file she'd just opened. It's Daniel. This was recorded yesterday. On the screen, Daniel Harrison looked directly into the camera, his expression resolute despite evident exhaustion. If you're seeing this, Sarah, it means you've made it to Amanda. The evidence is being published and the truth will be known. I'm sorry for everything you've endured because of my work. He paused, emotion breaking through his composed facade. I don't know if you can forgive me for the deception, for putting you in danger, but I want you to know that my love for you was never part of the cover, never a calculation. It was always real, the most real thing in my life. Transfer complete, Amanda announced as the pounding on the door intensified. It's done. The story is live. As if confirming her words, the pounding suddenly ceased, replaced by the sound of urgent voices and retreating footsteps. Someone's phone had clearly delivered breaking news that changed their priorities. Sarah continued watching Daniel's message, tears streaming freely down her face. I had to disappear to draw out those behind the conspiracy, he explained, but I've left you a way to find me when it's safe, Max knows. At the mention of his name, the German Shepherd's ears perked up. Daniel smiled sadly from the screen. James's remarkable partner has a gift for finding what's hidden. The path to me is encoded in his original training signals. James will understand. I love you, Sarah. I hope someday I'll have the chance to tell you that in person again. The video ended, leaving a profound silence broken only by Max's soft whine as he moved to comfort Sarah, resting his head on her lap as she processed this final revelation. His training signals, James repeated thoughtfully, looking at his canine partner with newfound wonder. Max was trained to respond to specific tones outside human hearing range. Daniel must have embedded those tones in something he knew would reach us. The cake, Sarah realized, understanding dawning. The listening device in the wedding cake wasn't just for surveillance. It was Daniel's way of ensuring Max would alert, setting everything in motion. He knew Max would find it. As emergency sirens wailed in the distance and news alerts chimed on Amanda's multiple devices announcing the breaking scandal engulfing Washington's highest echelons, James scratched behind Max's ears with profound appreciation. Well, boy, he said softly, looks like you've still got one more thing to find before this case is closed. Max's tail wagged once, his intelligent eyes meeting his handler's with what almost seemed like understanding. The dog who had detected something suspicious in a wedding cake had helped expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and now held the key to reuniting a bride with her missing groom. Sarah knelt beside Max, embracing the dog that had changed the course of so many lives with a single alert. "Thank you," she whispered against his fur. Outside, Washington, D.C. was erupting into chaos as the scandal broke across every news platform. But inside Amanda's apartment, a moment of peace settled over the unlikely trio. A retired police sergeant, a betrayed bride, and the remarkable dog that had brought them to the truth one alert at a time.